All right, so this is Angelique from Angelique Guides Infrastructures for Conscious Leadership and Collective Healing. And we're on a series of conversations with some awesome folks that I know, friends and people that I consider family and that are showing up for the work. And today's conversation is with Nick Miron, who is a brother from another mother. And we've worked a lot together in trainings and social justice stuff. And so part of this series of conversations is really about how are we showing up and what does it look like from our perspective and what's needed. And we're talking about white supremacy. We're talking about the intersectionalities. We're talking a little bit about everything as each person experiences that conversation and bringing it to the table so that we can hear things that are both sobering and life-giving. So Nick, if you can introduce yourself and then we'll jump into the questions.
Okay, I'm Nick Miron. And it's a very passionate, fired up guy who is really trying to create a society and communities that are based on affirmation, value, love, beloved community, and get away from this toxic individuality that our country has been operating under for a few hundred years, namely because of white supremacy. So, yeah, any way I can do that. I'm very happy to have been working with Angelique for a number of years now, and some other good folks, few, but other good folks doing this work.
Yeah, right on. Thank you. So our first question is what's present? And so some of the pieces that I think are important when I say the work, I mean the work of social justice, the work of equity, that to me is an internal and external thing and needs to work in that like an ecosystem and ecology of sustainability. And so from your perspective as somebody who's been showing up for the work, what's present? What's present for you right now in the midst of all these conversations? And I'll say the same thing I said with Rachel. It's like, you know, Facebook's like this fucking like world where words are going out and in public and in meetings and in circles, like people are expressing all types of thoughts. And so what's present for you as an activist and an advocate in this time?
I think there's a lot of people that want to have the conversation, more so than before, and not necessarily in a good way, but you know, we can get to that in a bit, but there seems to be this great awakening and people are just starting to rise from a slumber, especially white folks, and they're not able to pretend anymore that things are okay. People aren't able to pretend anymore that everything will be okay. Folks are really coming, I think, to grips with this idea that, wow, we really are pretty messed up. Our society is torturous to a lot of folks, and we need to do something. Also present, of course, is the backlash to that. So as that's happening, other folks are kind of digging in their heels and becoming more defensive, more resistant, more closed off, more shut down. And so there's this really strange parallel of equal force and equal balance. And so you have this slow emerging from a cocoon, you know, with the kind of eyelids closed, and there's this powerful response that's also coming up. So that's what I see. But I do see a lot of people wanting to have some conversations about what's going on and about how we begin to try and change it.
Yeah, right on. And I would even venture for you as an activist and advocate, how is that, like, being surrounded by that, how is that presencing you? Like, what comes up for you in that, like, from your lens when you're seeing all of that stuff go down?
You know, white person fatigue is real for white people too, because a lot of folks, I've been getting so many emails and phone calls, and people want to know what they can do, and it's exhausting because people don't people don't want to take initiative on their own and just say, okay, let me find out how deep this really goes, or let me get a better analysis of what's actually happening, or let me think about how complicated all this is. They want easy fixes. And that's the challenge. Even if, as you have this awakening, it's not like you jump out of bed, you're quick and ready to go. You're slowly getting out of bed. Maybe you fall out of bed, okay? So people are still face planted on the floor, right? I don't know, I'm out in bed. What do I do? What do I do? And so there's this, I don't know, it's strange. It's almost like you have to be slow and empathetic. People are saying, we need to be empathetic, and especially with the election, the rural white working class, we're supposed to be empathetic and let everybody into the movement or into justice work in their own way. And I just don't think that's good enough, to be honest. I think we're at a point now where one person's slowness is another person's trauma.
Right.
And so if we're saying to folks, well, take your time, come in when you're ready, do what you can. Then we're saying to other folks, it's okay to be traumatized by state, sanctioned police violence. It's okay to be horribly abused and thrown out of your house, because this person needs to take their time.
Yeah.
That's hard for me to figure out how to deal with. So just not really dealing with it. It's exhausting. But for a white guy, it's doing the constant, like a Conrad, a trainer in France, says, mental gymnastics of how to figure out how to move this person forward so they can actually be impactful.
Mm-hmm.
That gets a little bit tiring.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I notice is watching some of this go down, kind of that recognition that everything has conspired to create a sleeping state.
Mm-hmm.
From the education system to folks workspace, just a constant state of sleep. And so that when people are waking up, there's so much dissonance, because there's tell me what to do, because you've been kind of taught that that's how you arrive at self-awareness and and show up and do the work. Is tell me what to do. How do I check off the box? If it's a multiple choice, test, I'll just fill in whatever, right? Yeah. Versus the old critical thinking and analysis of something. And I think that being able to recognize how those have created conditions for that type of mentality, and that some of the work is recognizing that you can fall back asleep, because if you continue in the same systems, the same way, the same movement, the same inherent I wake up, this is my life, I'm gonna hashtag it, hashtag the shit out of it, right? Hashtag local shit. I'm picking on that right now. Right? It's just this great small bubble of a world, mm-hmm. Which we all live in our bubbles, and then there's this recognition that back to what you opened with, that individualistic type of mentality. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for saying that, and because it's real and true. The next question is, what's missing? What do you think is missing from either the work, the conversation with white folks? I don't know, however you're lensing that, because I think what to me is really important about this conversation, or us having and fucking recording this shit, is that there's other folks out there that are either showing up to do the work and are in the same places that we're at, fucking frustrated and trying to figure it out, and wondering what that looks like and we've done that. We're what are other trainers doing? What are other folks doing? Is this a collective thing? And so when I say what's missing, it's really GPSing where you're at in the intersection of what you see in this conversation, in this whole collective mess.
Yeah. Well, part of it comes from the first question, what's present. Everything is so linked and connected, Mm-hmm. So what's missing is partly that deep analysis, understanding of what's actually happening. Yeah. And so white folks want the easy answers. They don't want to take anything or do anything that's time consuming. That isn't just, oh, here's what I do. And really what's become very present and obvious in terms of what's missing is folks don't want to do anything that's going to be risky or sacrifice. And so, there's this, we talked about the sleeping thing, and what a lot of, especially middle class white folks do is, they go to jobs and work, and then they're done working. And so they've built their lives around working so they can have comfort and convenience. And that is that cocooned, what was the word you used?
Bubble.
But yeah, it's a bubble, right? And so they're staying in that bubble. And so the bubble might float over to one of us and they say, hey, what can we do? And when they get the answer, they don't want to pop the bubble. So they float back somewhere else to other people in bubbles,
right?
So that they can be happy bubbles floating, because nobody wants to come out of that.
Right.
If you pop your bubble, it can hurt when you land.
Right.
And so I'm terrible with metaphors, this. But yeah, people will go as far as they can, up and until it gets uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's risky, or something has to be sacrificed. People will often say, "Oh, I don't have time for that." They have time to go on, weeks of vacations and do all kinds of other fun things. They have time for that, but not time for justice work. And I go on vacation. I'm not saying vacations are bad, but I also try to make sure I balance that by showing up to do what needs to be done, even using my time off to do so. So we need to be able to balance all this stuff. But I think what's missing for a lot of folks is just the unwillingness to step into that murky waters, to the unknown, and even further into what's going to possibly be risky, what's going to be some sacrifice, what's going to be hard, what's going to be uncomfortable, what's going to hurt a little bit. Right. I think that's all missing. The other thing I think missing too, though, are people that do the work with the deep enough analysis to hold all this stuff. There's so many diversity trainers and people, diversity and inclusion. We talk about learning about other cultures, and it's wonderful. Teach me about what a Jew-Rican is.
Yeah.
What are you? I want to know. What shouldn't I say to you? What should I say to you? How do I greet you? We do all this fun stuff, and it sounds awesome. Or we do the emergency community meeting. It's relation to nothing that's been happening around here. But, because so many terrible things are happening. So let's all get together. We've got a few hundred people together. And really, we're not going to talk about white supremacy. We're not going to talk about patriarchy or capitalism. So none of the things that actually created the mess we're in, not going to bring them up. We're going to focus on what's happy, what feels good, and maybe some incidental things that folks can feel good about joining. All the while, the root of it all is still growing very healthy and strong. So that analysis and the willingness, I think, are two things that are really missing.
Right. When I was talking to my daughter the other day, we were kind of talking about like the exotification of people of color and the exotification of the marginalized groups and things like that, and how really it reminds I recognize the tourism industry as being a perfect model for how as society we engage each other, and looking at each other from this to some of what you mentioned, it's like, oh, so what does that mean? What food do you cook? Mm-hmm. Make me some beans. This sounds great. Bypassing the idea of the work of relationship and authenticity in relationship. And while these words are overused, and the little, along with the words like community and shit like that, right? Overused with it no longer holds substance, because what it looks like is not the work of engagement, the work of relationship, the work of showing up, the work of the mess. There's this wanting to create change without the vulnerability necessary to say that you have no idea and you don't know, and this is the way you've been moving, right? And the recognition of the lack of capacity for that. And to me, when I'm watching like some of the dynamics, and I've said this like at the Red 10 and in some of my conversations, I'm like, if the objective is not to offend, if the objective is like to be, I don't want to be like that person who sounds angry, like, I'm like, let it go now. Make some quick peace with that, because somebody's going to be offended. You cannot control others, and you're going to have to build your damn muscle. Join the club, right? It's like, build a damn muscle, because frankly, that's an act of privilege, right? That's an act of privilege that is painful. Its impact is devastating. So it kind of alluding to some of what you're saying, like even the folks showing up to do trainings and the work, having the deep analysis, because when they're walking around doing presentations that are going, how not to offend 101, I'm like, kill me now. Just kill me now. Just kill me. Like, just, I'm done. I'm done. You missed it. And if you want clean, like tight, makes me think of making a bed, clean, tight corners where everything looks so well packaged, good luck with that. That's not happening.
Yeah. Well, if people want to conflate everything and simplify it down to simple one-line things, like don't stereotype. And so the truth is that no matter what your identity is, let's say you're, you mind if I use you, Puerto Rican, Jewish, raised in Brooklyn, and all, those pieces, then you shouldn't say, oh, that means but you do it to white people. You do it to white people. You say white people are this and white people are that. I'm watching that video. And so people try to say it's the same thing. Well, if you can have black pride, why can't I have white pride? And they conflate all these issues and to say that there's equality there, that we shouldn't have pride in any of that, rather than understanding that, one, even though you're part of a culture, you're still an individual. And so we don't want to align individuals with specific cultural traits, because that is stereotyping. While at the same time, you can draw conclusions and patterns around whiteness because of the way that it infected people that are socialized as white, which is, what white people are. And so it erased all of our individualities. And people try to say, well, it's all the same, and we're all impacted the same way. And if you say this, we should have White History Month, we should have white pride, and we shouldn't be afraid of this. And so people try to conflate all these things into very simple, well, don't have pride, or don't stereotype anybody. If you're not this because you're culture, then I'm not that because I'm white. And you just can't do that. You can't do that. Anyway, something you said made me think of that. So.
Yeah. And I remember I did a training recently where, the conversation was around, the model that I used was like villages, and you have this village that's informed the way you are, how you perceive the world, how you engage the world, right? And trying to break down the idea that it's recognizing that and understanding that the fundamental conversation is about your village and the way of your village oppressing others, right? And that the dominant culture has been, white supremacy, from our curriculums to, every step of the way, right? And so recognizing that so much assimilation, that's like, primary in terms of culture. Lives have been sacrificed in the name of this thing. And to be able to understand the construct and the systemic nature of it is what we're saying, right? Is what we're holding as a conversation, rather than this very idealized, it's funny, to mock it at the same time. It's like all tongue in cheek, like 10 steps to understanding oppression.
Oh boy.
Like,
one more article of steps.
yeah. It's like 5 steps to becoming an activist.
4 things not to say.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay. Okay. I hear the desire for simplicity. And again, back to like the act of privilege in that somehow you get an easy fucking road into actualizing the work of justice, which will take our lifetime and many more, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like we're some special kids here that we get to show up and it all disappears. Like this is for the rest of our lives, right? Like this is like how we move in the world. We're gonna die, and then another generation is gonna come up. So mm-hmm. there's no quick fix here. You got to show up for the messiness like the rest of us have to, right? And so to me, that becomes like, again, part of like the shifting the mentality around it. Because the next innovation will help us shift, you know, we have all this like business for good and things like that, which I hear it, I get it. And there's a lot of that that's wonderful, thinking about values and thinking about integrity and thinking about alignment still within a capitalistic system, right? Like this is the tension of that bullshit. We can come up with that and we can come up with new ideas, but the laying out, the deconstructing and the dismantling is not going to take 5 minutes, 1 year, or 5 years. It's fucking taken centuries to create this.
There's at least 15 steps there.
Yeah. And we're not even at justice yet, right? So yeah, so thanks for naming that stuff, because I think like what I love about this is Rachel Rice, who I did the other video with, like she said the same thing. What's missing is like, she's like a critical analysis, mm-hmm. right? The lens of that, because, and that's where her and I talked about like having that lens and having that filter, then you're able to deconstruct all the areas and see what is at the essence and the core of it, so that we can be at the work of dismantling that by every action that we take, both personal, interpersonal, and communal. So yeah, the next question on the list is like strategies. What are the strategies that fire you up? And the reasons I thought about these is because I recognize both the duality of like that internal, not even duality, but it's like that multi-spectrum thing where there's like the internal shit that we got to show up for and with and do and integrate into who we are as people. Dismantle and deconstruct, and at the same time also like what do strategies actually look like? And for you as a person, what are those that are like that are fire to you, that you sit down and get you lit up in order to be part of dismantling, deconstructing, and moving toward what would be a new way of being in the world and a new way of being in community?
Well, if I could answer that with any kind of certainty, I'd probably be a lot better off than I am now, and more effective. I think it's become very clear that this traditional style of education and justice training just it's not enough. It's barely even. Well, there's not enough here, and so. What really excites me is the possibility of creating the community we're looking for, mm-hmm. and so trying to structure lives in a way that is not individualistic but dependent on other people as they're dependent on us, and so there's a number of different ways that can look, but I've been really messing with the ideas. You and I have talked about this too. You know, cooperative living, mm-hmm. and I'm not talking the 60s commune type, but intentional communities where the intention really is that you are there for everybody else as much as yourself.
Right.
Not really forgoing your own self. Our society tells us to do that enough as it is. So we need to be intentional about caring for ourselves, but wrapping up part of our self-care with a necessary understanding that caring for ourselves in many ways also means caring for others. We can't distinguish those two, because I'm so dependent on everybody else that my care is wrapped with theirs. If they're not well, I'm not well.
Right.
And so I'm really excited about that kind of potential, because the other thing that would do then, and I didn't even mention this in what's missing, but the other thing that would do is then provide some very real and present support structure for people that are engaging in this work. And so, you know, whether it's going to a sit-in or occupying a space or going to a weekend training, whatever you have to do, there's people that are in the community where you are that can that will be caring for your family, that will be helping to make sure that there's food and the things that your family needs. And also someone else can take a turn and go do those things, and you can stay back and care for their family. And so people can really share in the justice work, but also share in the life work.
Right.
And kind of return to a humanity and way of being that many indigenous folks have been trying to continue, and that folks of color, communities of color throughout the world have been pretty much decimated in attempting living that way, and we're genocide and all that stuff, white supremacy. So living in an intentional way that returns to our shared resources, our shared value, and developing that with intention. I'm not sure if I probably said a lot less than I said a lot more words than there was meaning there. I think I was trying to get my head around what that could be, but
yeah,
that's what really excites me is continuing the work, but also building in some level of what we're actually working for.
Right.
Because there's just not enough of that. There's not enough of that.
Right.
So many justice trainers, we're all so scattered. And I understand we have our lives, we have debt and mortgages and rent and kids and all other stuff. And so, I'm not admonishing anybody, but just recognizing that we can't keep doing this work without at some point, I think, trying to actually also build what we're working for, what we're after. Because I get tired of telling people, and I actually stopped telling people this, but I used to tell folks that, I can't tell you exactly what people would say, well, what will it look like if, when we're there? What will, they're white people usually. And I would say, well, we've never been, and as a nation, we've never existed without white supremacy and racism. So it's kind of hard to know what it will look like.
Yeah.
There's truth in that. And yet it's not good enough anymore,
Yeah.
I think we need to start working for that as we're working to dismantle the other. So those are strategies that really get me fired up. When I see that kind of community-minded folks coming together, not ignoring justice, but doing so in a way that empowers their justice work, that's exciting.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember, and we've talked a lot about this, and for me, that's always been I'm never sure about the idea of living with other people in that way. I'm also the oldest of 8, and life has always been much more complex when it's with other people. And I do find myself, as time goes by, just recognizing what would it look like to be in a space where we're able to really fully live out the integration of being connected to the earth, of being connected to each other, supporting each other, of being able to go out and do work in the ways that we do presently do them, and then also have a life-giving daily environment and place to come home to. And I'm a big home person. That is so important to me. And so I've been thinking a lot lately. There's some stuff I want to share with you, and we'll share that kind of off the video. But yeah, and I think that's important. I went over to some new folks that I met at Shabbat dinner at the house, and we were kind of talking about this and talking about here we are, we're deep in the work and the dismantling and the naming and kind of doing all of that and going, bonkers and frustrated and fill in the blank. And we were talking about and this because I say this a lot, we do all this resistance work. We need to, if not more and or in equal measure, be doing work that's innovative, evolutionary, because that would be life-giving to us, because we're constantly facing the resistance and we're constantly showing up for a very like stuck space. And the intensity of that on our own souls, minds, and spirits, right? And kind of like that thing. And so we kind of talking about the idea of like, what does it look like as activists and advocates to also be committed to creating the very thing, right? And it's not going to be perfect, and it's going to be messy, and we're going to have to figure it out, and, you know, fill in the blank, while still, you know, living in a very capitalistic society, while still having to use money as a resource, not the only resource, as a resource for exchange, kind of like all of that, while still, and that's what I was saying to Rachel. I was saying that I still want to, you know, my heart's desire is to still have like a piece of land where I can grow my herbs, where I can be connected to the earth and stuff like that. And then I told her, I was like, then I lay down and I'm like, what the fuck am I thinking about? That's ownership, and it's not even my land. And can my people take me back? And who are these people? Like, it's Puerto Rico, it's Spain, it's like Israel, it's Africa. You know, somebody has to take me back, because I'm over here trying to have ownership of a land that doesn't even belong to me.
Yeah.
Right. And like the complexity, and that's real. I don't have an answer to that, because this is where I live. This is where I was born. Right. Right now, this is where I'm at. I'm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and so are you. Right. Like, it's like, this is where we're at. And how do we move in a way as activists and advocates that we can live our lives both honoring to whom the land belongs to, and what does reparation in that way look like, and simultaneously figuring out how we live here and how we honor like the fact that we're here and choosing to stay here. Right? Like, being able to, but that's life-giving.
Yeah.
Right? It's still a space where we get to say, okay, it can feel different, because the work is so intense and the work is so full of challenge. So thank you for sharing that, because I see more, and it's interesting, because as a person of color, coming from a community and a culture very loosely that has this as a core value, but having to assimilate to American values, the generational impact of that has left so much of us like trying to like out on our own without those deep and strong systems that and roots that we come from, right? And so for me, that also is like work that I have to do for myself, which is reconnecting to those like ancestral ideas of what it means to be in my community, and what it means to be connected to my family, which is really painful and really hard, because we're so removed as a culture, and impacted by white supremacy in such a way that we're all in survival mode.
Yeah.
Right? And all aiming for the white American standard of like, success means I'm getting, you know, paid $50,000 a year or whatever. I got the house, the kids, I'm in debt up to my eyeballs. And this is like, this is what I was aiming for. You know what I mean? Like further oppression and further like, just marginalization because of the impact of that over time. Right. And so for me as a person of color, there's like so much internal work around safety in community, around trust in community. And that's something that I still, you know, I'm still working on. So nonetheless, going back to a space ancestrally where we're so interconnected and interdependent. Because in my culture, so much of that has moved on. I mean, there's families that still are inherently like that and super connected. And I often admire and highly respect their ability to have survived assimilation in that way.
Yeah.
You know?
It's different for white folks, of course. That things, you know, one of the things I think, well, is for all people looking for justice, or working for justice, is trying to imagine, you know, what you were doing, what you would be doing if you didn't have to work for justice, if we were there, you know, and then figuring out how to start doing that now.
Right.
So you get the joy, because we need to have joy, and do things that are life affirming,
Yeah.
And for white folks, I think a lot of that starts with looking at how whiteness has infected us. And I think for a lot of white people, it's the fear of not having enough. And I see this in myself, different ways, but often with wine. We've talked about this too some, but my aunt gave me a wine rack some years ago, holding 64 bottles, and at the time I might have had 8 bottles, and of course, because you have it there, you fill it up, right? And so I got up to 40 at one point, and I just noticed that once the number of bottles of wine I had went to like 20, I'd go to the wine store and be like, oh, okay, I better go stock up. And then it's like, okay, what the hell am I afraid of, really? And it's that fear of not having enough. And again, we cannot conflate this to the fear of safety of persons of color.
Right. Right.
White folks need to know that fear of not having enough is fear of not having comfort and convenience, because there's not a wine store open all hours. And so the fear is, well, what happens if I want a glass and the store's closed? Or what happens if I want something and I can't access it? What happens if, my air conditioning goes for a night and I have to be in 80-degree weather overnight? And so our fear of loss there is around comfort and convenience, while at the same time, as complicated as it is, there's a very real, deep void in whiteness itself. And so our fear of safety is not the same. It's not a physical safety that folks of color have. What we can see when we're open to it, and this is where people like to stay in the bubble, is the vast emptiness of white individual isolation. And so we don't have deep community because so many of our cultures gave up community to be white, to access the comfort and convenience that white America offered and promised. And so we sacrificed, our ancestors sacrificed whatever community we could have had for the sake of being able to individually achieve the things that we wanted most in life. And the things we wanted most, we were told, should be the education, the job, the mortgage. We were told, this is what's so messed up, right? We're told that it's healthy to have debt, right? So you cancel your credit card and they say, well, are you sure you want to do that? It could hurt your credit rating. So we're supposed to have debt. That's how messed up our society is. And white people eat that shit up. They eat it up and live into that. So yeah, there's that, but also for white folks, and it gives into some other questions too. There's a very real fear, not physical safety fear, but a fear of well, where does this go? Where if I look into my whiteness and think about how it's infecting me, where does it end? Is it my belief in God? Has that been challenged by whiteness? Has that been affected? Of course, the answer is yes. But people may not know that at first, and so it's like peeling back all these layers. Well, how far does it go? How far does it go? You mean this is white? I don't want to do this. That's not what I signed up for. Let me go back.
Right.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's so complicated. And again, it speaks to why, for strategies, we need to have that support. And so when someone starts falling down the hole, especially as a white guy, I mean, we need to look for each other. As white people, we need to step in there and say, I got you. I'll hold you as you fall. We'll fall together. Yeah. It's so needed.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, absolutely. The next one is life support. What do folks showing up? And, it's interesting because I was thinking about the impact of a lot of this language we're using, right? Like woke, showing up, like all of this. And, what we're meaning by that is really the everyday, every moment, every second choice to name, question, interrupt, and grapple with the impact, internalization, external manifestation of of white supremacy, of oppression, of marginalization, and like all these intersections that start like really are impacted. And it's interesting to think about like the political climate right now and all the things that are being named as, you know what I mean? So there's like, you know, LGBTQIA, and then there's like Muslims, and there's like women. And it's interesting to still, and this is something that I struggle with as well, like when we're talking about all these things and like all this, the pieces of each of those attempts to label and categorize the impact, when we know that we've been showing up, you know, and doing this work, the work of justice, equity, and dismantling and deconstructing, that these things have been present all along. This is not a new thing, right? And there's just now all of a sudden these really highlighted ways of having these conversations and engaging this work. And so when we're using the language of showing up, we're saying folks that are willing to confront that, willing to stay with the difficulty rather than retract. And that's not a judgment, it's a recognition that there's a choice in that. There's a choice to say, I'm going to show up. I'm going to, sorry, I'm thinking about protesting. I'm going to protest. I'm not talking about a rally. I'm not talking about silent vigiling. I'm going to go protest, you know, and the folks that protest and the folks that do trainings and the folks that are sitting with or in systems themselves doing, and I love what Deborah Fries, I think is her name, I may have said that wrong, but said in her TED Talk, like, you know, that are doing hospice within the systems. Mm-hmm. You know, like here's all these people and they continue every day to engage this. And so when I'm saying what do folks that are showing up, I'm talking about folks that are choosing moment by moment to continue to engage in the difficulty and complexity of this, and are committed to it. And so what for them what do they need to hear from your perspective that would be life support for, you're the second person to say, you know, white people experience white people fatigue as well. Right? Like, yes, yeah, you know, yes, and yes. And the work, those of us all showing up for this work of justice and the naming and the creating space for all of this, we often burn out, we're often exhausted, we're often we ourselves are struggling, whether it's emotionally, mentally, physically, financially, to really make this life of ours work. And so what does life support look like? What do folks that are showing up for it and engaging in all this shit, like, what do they need to hear? What to you is life support?
What to me is life support?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one. So are you asking what would I want to hear if I went somewhere?
I would say as an activist and an advocate, what are life-giving words that you can give to other white folks that are showing up? And I say that with the caution of, this is not like that bliss out transcend bullshit. This is not that checkout bullshit. But what are the things, what would you want to hear from someone who's been showing up and doing the work that to you would be life-giving as you're showing up?
I'm not sure I have a good answer for that. Things that I would want to hear. I do think, that the times I felt most attached to words were when it's something that hit core pieces of me and I couldn't ignore it. And so I think it's important to understand and relate to white folks who are struggling and do so in a way that I'm stalling for time here. I do believe that a lot of the work that needs to be done, our bodies can help us understand what needs to be done. I think if we listen to what our bodies are saying in a real deep sense, and so we're not talking to folks that are in and out, right? You said these are folks that are committed.
Yes.
Trust what your body is telling you. If you want to call it a gut instinct or whatever, but really listen to what's coming from the deepest core, because that is what we have most in common with other folks, whether they're Black, brown, transgender, across genders and orientations and age. It's our core of our humanity that we can relate to and empathize with, not knowing the experiences, of course. But so I think when we're mindful of what's happening deep inside, and hear words that touch our core, to stay there with that and share that with someone, and just sit and breathe. maybe not even talk, but recognize that's real, that's true, and no person's words can ever be as I don't think meaningful as that moment when you feel that.
Right.
And because, like, for me, that's life support, because when I hear that kind of thing, what comes back to me are all the times that I've turned away from my gut when I said, well, no one else is thinking that, so maybe I'm off here, or I didn't act on something because maybe I wasn't seeing it the way that they were intending. And so I kind of reflected all the times I've turned away from myself, when all along my body knew. And I don't think I'm unique in that. I think a lot of white folks know when something's not okay, know when they need to speak up and do something, know what change may need to happen. But instead of actually doing it, and again, I totally get this. We operate in that fear of not wanting to be alone, not wanting to look radical, not feeling whatever. And so we continue to operate out of the white narrative of disembodying ourselves, of saying, don't listen or feel to what your body's saying. Just keep calm and carry on, right? And so my life support has been those moments when somebody will do something or speak to me in a way that gives life to that piece of me inside that I ignore. Because it's like my own body saying, hey, what's the matter with you? I've been here all along. I've been trying to tell you. Why aren't you listening? I feel most me at those times.
Thank you. Our last question. It's so funny because every time I read this, like, I always think of you, because I know how much you love, and this is sarcasm, how much you love when this particular piece comes up in things. And so the last one is actions. What can people do? And this is not the to-do list. This is not the check-off list, right? That's our challenges with that mentality in trainings. It's like, here now there's this check-off list. This is not that. This is literally what can action look like, as folks, either if you want to speak to folks specifically already committed and showing up, or to folks who are just beginning their journey. What can action look like? So how to whomever you want to speak to in terms of what possibility can be next, and or maybe that to you is not a possibility, and it's like, this is what needs to fucking happen next. Whatever that is, what does action, the act of something, look like?
I think the challenging part of that kind of question is always that the answer comes across chronologically, because we're geared to think that way. Right. So the first thing you say, people think, oh, that's the first thing I should do.
Right.
I appreciate your lead in, at least, because it's so complicated and all needs to happen together.
Right.
So I'll go through some of the thoughts I have around action. There needs to be, as for white folks, I'm guessing, well, I'm not going to tell what black and brown people should do. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So for white folks, white people need to do their work for themselves to figure out who you are, who told you who you are, and how are they wrong. So really reflect on yourself, who you are, what you represent, what's deep inside in that core. Do that work while you're also looking at who told you what you're supposed to be. And so make some connections. So people will say, yeah, there's tons of books, there's videos online, there's all these resources to learn. Yes, we have to learn that stuff. And at the same time, we need to make sure we're connecting with ourselves to see, well, how did whiteness teach me this? How did whiteness teach me that? Because that's how we can liberate ourselves from it. If all we're doing is getting the history, then we're not actually liberating ourselves. We're just learning how messed up things are. So we need to do our own liberation journey work within the framework of our national white supremacy capitalist movement. So how has capitalism affected you? How has misogyny and patriarchy affected you also? And make those connections. As you're doing that, because we don't want white people to go off into the woods for 6 months to do this work. So as you're doing that, show up at med meetings. NAACP meets regularly. Show up at these emergency community meetings that have been happening. And at first, I would encourage folks to just listen. You don't need to go in there as though you know what to do or you know the answer. Just listen, hear how the conversation goes. You might learn some things, but you also might learn what more needs to be said. Because a lot of community meetings, there's a whole lot that doesn't get said that should.
Yes.
While you're also giving yourself the opportunity to learn from folks of color to better understand how what's happening so that you better understand what to do. So you're kind of going from the inner stuff to the outer. You're kind of expanding your horizon. And as you're doing that, then you need to figure out ways to actually create the change you're working for. So whether it's creating some alternative value structure or a shared cooperative community or a for-profit business maybe that operates in some kind of nonprofit model like social enterprise. So you're going to start one of those up and hire folks out of prison. Or you're going to start going to monthly board meetings for the prison board meetings. I know one guy is trying to start a local socialist chapter. So there's things you can do. But it's really upon you to find out what those things are. But going to those meetings, going to the rallies, going to the protests, as you're educating yourself, I think are two of the places that I would start. I don't say start, but two things I would offer initially. What you need to be careful of are the things that actually don't do anything, but make yourself feel good. And there's a kind of a thing that came up after the election. I don't even want to say the words, but it's stationery, office stationery. So wearing office stationery. Right, that's a great example of a well-intended effort. It's well-intended, but that's completely for you. Nothing guaranteed. If I wore office stationery, nothing could guarantee anything else I'm a safe person to talk to or lean on. Nothing. Right. That's purely a self-motivated perspective. And there's some other reasons, but they don't actually create change. Nothing about it does. So we need to be sure that what we're doing actively and intentionally seeks out to create a different way of doing things, structurally and systemically. Good relationships are fine. Meet some folks, talk to folks, have each other for dinner. That's great. And we need to make sure we're intentionally and proactively creating change within structures and systems with anything we do, because that's the only way to actually do what we're working for.
Yeah. And I would also add to that the distinction of that difference not being, oh, I don't want to be like that angry Black woman. I don't want to be like that angry Latina. So there has to be a different way of, of approach. And I'm like, I'm done, right? Like recognizing that movement, that again, that very simple statement and very simple act is one of privilege and supremacy. Mm-hmm. And I love watching, like, my daughter. She is on fire, and she was talking about the stationery stuff. She's like, okay. She's like, who's that for? What's the purpose of that? Who does it soothe? You want to do something? Wear a damn button that says something. Mm-hmm. Like, do that. Then I know, because you have the courage to stand.
Yeah.
I know that you're really, truly committed. And I'm like, it's one of those drop the mic things. I'm just like, I feel like I'm good. I'm good. Watching her just engage and go full head on with things. And so I just wanted to make that distinction, because I think sometimes when white people are showing up, there's this like, oh, I don't want to be like, because I want to be able to reach people. I want to be able, there's like this whole like, I don't want to shut somebody down. So I'm going to make sure that, I do it in a way that doesn't fill in the blank, fill in the blank, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And part of this work is a recognition that not everybody's that you're going to encounter or that's going to come across you and whatever you're saying is going to quickly sign at the dotted line.
Yeah.
And love you for it and want to, there's so much that's unrealistic about that I still I'm baffled at that idea. Because for me, as a person of color, I recognize that I've had to deal with people not liking my ass. Mm-hmm. And that's a part of my narrative in life. Somebody's not gonna fucking like me, and I can't live by that. So it still blows my mind, the act of privilege and supremacy in not wanting to stir the pot or not wanting. So to name that, when you're thinking of the action of alternative, the action of like doing things differently, knowing that shouldn't be in contrast to the marginalized groups and the pain and the suffering and the grief and the mourning and all the energy and shit present there, right? Yeah. So thank you for naming those things as like, in terms of like, what are the ways folks can like further engage? And I love the idea of listening. And so to me, that's become like, what are the cues that that something that you're showing up for is solid and within the integrity of justice and equity and the movement. It's when the marginalized people are the center voices and not for the novelty or the exoticism of it, but because who better can speak to the change that needs to happen?
Yeah.
Right? And so we know like that, okay, that it's like a sign of health. Yes. Oh, good. Right? Where a white person gets to either be in silent observation or in full ownership of their white supremacy, again, not asked for, given.
Yeah.
Right? So no consent needed for white supremacy. If you're white, the privilege and the benefits are given. Right? And so it's like, how do you begin to know? And that's what I really appreciate about what you said in terms of action, because more often than not, people are not aware. They engage in a meeting, they hear the word community, they hear the word, justice, and have no idea how to be in that or what to be looking for.
Yeah.
To know, right, to know what's in alignment with the dismantling and deconstruction of the oppressive system that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. Words to look out for are unity, together. We, all of us, if you hear that at a meeting of some kind, white people beware. Who is the we referring to?
Yeah.
Yep.
And like I found myself saying in that way, like distinctions are not division.
Yep.
In the context of justice conversations, for me to say that as people of color, we have our own conversations. We have our, like, white people have their work and their conversations that you need to tend to.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not being divisive. That's acknowledging the distinction of what it means to be white and what it means to fully embody the racist, supremacist, right, culture and way of beingness. And then for people of color, we have our own conversations, our own healing and mending to be doing that are not the place of white people.
Yeah.
And vice versa, any other marginalized, right, community that experiences violence or genocide, fill in the blank. There's the distinct work and the work of, you know, and we're working with the language of allyship and the support and the, you know what I mean, like all of that. But just recognizing that there's a place for that. But the support should never be the center.
Right.
Should never be at the center.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's interesting, which calls us to evaluate what's based on ego and personal satisfaction versus what really impacts toward equity and justice.
Yeah.
So this has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with me.
Sure. I just thought of one more thing, actually.
Yeah.
One more thing. As far as actions, there's very everyday practical things you can do too. Like if you have a bank account at Wells Fargo, close it down. They've been racist since the beginning. So those kind of pieces too. I forgot to mention that. But yeah, those kind of things. And tell them why. If you're going to close your account at Wells Fargo, call them up and tell them why you're doing it.
Yeah.
Have a nice day. But you know, absolutely about the other piece too I wanted to say was, you know, what you said, you know, in caucus, white people need to teach white people. And so that's another thing white people can do is make sure they're engaging white people at their family dinners, at their almost all white or all white staff meetings. If nobody says anything to respond to, then bring something up. So I just wanted to, what you're saying made me think of those two things too, which are you know, pretty good. So
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my. Anyway, right? Like we're family like that. Where can people, if they want to further engage you in conversation or reach out, if that's comfortable to you, where can people find you or reach out to you at?
Do you have a preference? I mean, I have my work email or Facebook. I'm okay.
Whatever works for you, really. You know, that's whatever you prefer.
Okay, Facebook is the best, probably.
Okay, and so they would find you at Nick Miron, NickMiron.
Yep.
And then just take it from there. Which to me, it's important, right? Because when we're talking about like support and reaching out and knowing, being really intentional about the community we surround ourselves with. And I know as a person of color, for me, my internal community is so important, especially around this work, and my support around this is really important. For context, super important.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I love you.
Love you too.
And I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll continue this conversation in other ways.
Okay, sounds good, Angelique. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Nick.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.